People think that when you get older and start enjoying your own company, something must be wrong with you. They assume you're lonely. They assume you've given up. They assume nobody calls, nobody visits, and nobody wants you around. But what? Why if they're completely wrong? I'm 91 years old, and I'll tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was 60. There's a huge difference between being lonely and choosing solitude. Loneliness makes you wish someone would knock on your door. Solitude makes you grateful when nobody does. My name is Cecily. I've been married. I've raised children. I've lost people I loved. I've worked, cooked, worried, laughed, cried, and spent more years taking care of everyone else than I can count. My husband Harold and I were together for more than 53 years. He passed away 6 years ago on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Funny how life-changing moments can happen on days that seem completely ordinary. I remember I was defrosting the freezer. I stopped halfway through, and for several days, I couldn't bring myself to finish. That's how grief works. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself with dramatic tears. Sometimes it simply makes you stop doing something as ordinary as cleaning your freezer. I have 3 children. They live in different parts of the country. My granddaughter calls me every Sunday. My phone still rings. People still invite me places, so when I say I prefer being alone, please understand this. I am not alone because nobody wants me. I'm alone because, after 91 years, I've finally learned that I actually like my own company. And if you're over 60 and you've started feeling the same way, you may have developed 7 qualities that most people don't understand. The first is simple, but it took me decades to learn. You know yourself. And I don't mean that in the way people put it on inspirational cards. I mean, you finally know the difference between what you actually want and what you've spent your life doing because somebody else expected it from you. When I was 34, I couldn't have answered that question. I loved my husband, Harold. He was a good man, but our lives became so intertwined that sometimes I couldn't tell where his preferences ended and mine began. I cooked the meals he liked. I listened to the music he enjoyed. I read books because he wanted to discuss them. Even little things became shared habits, and there was nothing wrong with that. That's what marriage can be. But somewhere along the way, I lost track of the woman underneath the wife. Mother, daughter, sister, and caretaker. Then life changed. The children grew up. Harold was gone. The house became quiet, and suddenly there was nobody asking me what they wanted. For the first time, I had to ask myself, what do I want? At first, that question frightened me. Then it became liberating. I discovered foods I liked, songs I had forgotten, books I actually wanted to read, places I wanted to sit, things I wanted to think about. I discovered that knowing yourself isn't just knowing your strengths. It's knowing your flaws too. It's remembering the mistakes you made, the words you wish you could take back, the people you hurt without intending to, the moments when you weren't the best version of yourself. You can't discover those things in constant noise. Sometimes you need to sit quietly enough to hear yourself. And that brings me to the second quality. You've learned that silence isn't empty. When I was young, silence made me uncomfortable. If Harold went away for a few days, I'd turn on the radio. I'd call someone. I'd clean something that didn't need cleaning. I wanted voices around me because I thought silence meant something was missing. I don't believe that anymore. One morning in my 70s, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea. The house was completely silent, and I suddenly realized something. I hadn't spoken to anyone for almost an entire day, and I was okay. Actually, I felt wonderful. The silence didn't feel like an empty house. It felt like a room inside myself that I had finally discovered. That's when I understood the difference. When you're afraid of silence, you spend your life escaping yourself. When you become comfortable with silence, You begin meeting yourself, and that can be one of the most peaceful experiences of getting older. You begin noticing things you couldn't hear before. The sound of rain, the ticking of a clock, the kettle boiling, your own thoughts, a memory you haven't visited in years. The third quality is one I wish more people understood. You've stopped performing for everyone. For most of our lives, we perform, we smile when we're tired, we laugh at jokes that aren't funny, we attend events because we're afraid of disappointing people, we tell people we're fine when we're not, we become the person everyone expects us to be. And for years, I was very good at it. I hosted dinners, I attended gatherings, I wore clothes I didn't particularly like. I stood in kitchens preparing food while secretly wishing everyone would leave so I could finally sit down. At the time, I thought that was simply what being a good wife and a good woman meant. But after 60, something changes. You begin asking, why am I doing this? And sometimes the answer isn't good enough anymore. You realize you don't want hundreds of polite conversations, you want a handful of honest ones. I have a friend named Dorothy. We don't see each other every day. Sometimes weeks go by. But when we sit together, we don't pretend. We talk about life. We talk about aging. We talk about mistakes. We talk about things we would never say at a crowded dinner table. And when I come home, I don't feel exhausted. I feel understood. That's the difference. As you get older, you may stop wanting more people and start wanting more depth. And that leads to the fourth quality. You have a rich inner world. People sometimes see an older person sitting alone and think they're doing nothing, but they don't know what's happening inside that person's mind. When I sit in my chair, I might look like I'm staring at the wall. I'm not. Sometimes I'm 17 again. Sometimes I'm standing in my grandmother's kitchen. Sometimes I'm remembering the smell of flowers outside my childhood home. Sometimes I'm thinking about Harold. Sometimes I'm remembering my children when they were small. Sometimes I'm thinking about conversations that happened 40 years ago and finally understanding what they meant. That isn't doing nothing. That's living inside a lifetime of memories. A person with a rich inner life doesn't need constant entertainment. They can sit with a thought. They can read, reflect, remember, imagine, wonder. And perhaps most importantly, they can enjoy their own presence. That's a beautiful thing. The fifth quality is something many people don't recognize until later in life. You value depth over quantity. When I was younger, I knew dozens of people, neighbors, our church friends, school, parents, family friends, people from work, people I saw at social gatherings. I remembered birthdays, sent cards, visited people, maintained relationships because I thought I was supposed to. Today, I don't have dozens of close people. I have a few, and that's enough. Maybe more than enough. I've learned that having 50 people who know your name isn't the same as having 4 people who truly know your heart. As we age, many of us naturally become more selective, not because we hate people, not because we've become cold, but because we finally realize that our time is limited, our energy is limited, and our emotional attention is precious. So we stop giving it away so easily. We choose carefully, and when we love someone, we love them deeply. The sixth quality is harder. You've survived grief, and grief changed your priorities. When Harold died, I didn't suddenly become wise. I became lost. For months, ordinary things felt pointless. I'd walk through a grocery store and wonder why I was standing there. I'd forget to eat. I'd sit in the same chair for hours. I didn't know what my life was supposed to look like anymore, but slowly, something happened. Grief began removing things that didn't matter. I stopped worrying about what people thought of me. I stopped attending things simply because I felt obligated. I stopped pretending every phone call needed an answer. I stopped caring whether my lawn looked perfect. Stopped worrying about impressing people. Grief has a strange way of showing you what's real. It takes away the things you thought you needed and leaves you standing beside the things you actually love. For me, that became very simple. My children, my granddaughter, a few friends, my kitchen, my garden, my memories, my quiet, and myself. That's enough, more than enough, and if you've experienced real loss, you may understand exactly what I mean. You stop wanting a bigger life. You start wanting a more meaningful one. And finally, the seventh quality, perhaps the deepest one of all. You've made peace with time. At 91, I don't think about time the way I did at 30. When you're young, time feels like a road stretching endlessly in front of you. When you're old, time feels more like a house. You can walk into different rooms. One moment, you're 91. The next, you're 6 years old again. You can remember your grandmother, your childhood bedroom, your first love, your wedding, your children's first steps, the sound of your husband's voice, the smell of a meal you haven't cooked in 30 years. All of it is still somewhere inside you, and that's one reason I value being alone. Quiet gives you access to those rooms. You can sit with your memories. You can finally understand things that confused you decades ago. You can forgive yourself for mistakes. You can appreciate moments you were too busy to appreciate when they happened. That's not emptiness. That's perspective. So if you're over 60 and you've started enjoying solitude, don't automatically assume something is wrong. Maybe you're simply changing. Maybe you're becoming more selective. Maybe you're finally comfortable enough with yourself that you don't need constant noise. But there is one important distinction I want you to remember. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. They may look identical from the outside. A person sitting alone at a kitchen table could be lonely, or they could be completely at peace. The difference is how they feel inside. If your heart feels heavy, if you're desperate for connection, if you're withdrawing because you're afraid of people or because you believe nobody cares, please don't ignore that. Reach out, call someone, visit someone, ask for company. Loneliness deserves attention, but if you're sitting alone with a cup of tea and thinking, I wouldn't trade this peace for anything, that's different. That's solitude. That's choosing yourself, and after decades of giving yourself to everyone else. There's nothing selfish about finally becoming comfortable in your own company. The world may tell you that you should always be busy, always social, always available, always surrounded by people, but you've lived long enough to know that more isn't always better. Sometimes less is more. Fewer people, deeper relationships, less noise, more peace, less pretending, more truth, and if that's where you are right now, I want you to hear this from a 91-year-old woman. You are not necessarily withdrawing from life. You may finally be learning how to live it on your own terms. You raised children. You worked. You cared for people. You showed up when others needed you. You carried responsibilities that nobody applauded. You've earned some quiet. You've earned slow mornings. You've earned afternoons where nobody needs anything from you. You've earned the right to sit in your favorite chair and simply think, and if you discover that you genuinely enjoy your own company, don't be ashamed of it. Because there's something incredibly powerful about reaching an age where you no longer need the world to constantly reassure you that you matter. You know you matter. You no longer need a crowded room to prove you're wanted. You no longer need endless conversations to prove you're interesting. You no longer need approval to enjoy your own life. You can simply sit in your kitchen, make your tea, look out the window. Remember the people you've loved, smile at the memories, and be grateful that you're still here. That's not giving up. That's coming home. And if you're watching this because you've recently started preferring your own company, I'd love to know something. Tell me in the comments. What is the one place in your home where you feel most like yourself? For me, it's this little kitchen. The kettle gets angry. The floor needs cleaning. The cupboards aren't impressive. But when I sit here, I feel completely at home, and maybe that's the real secret of growing older. At some point, you stop searching for a place where you belong. You realize you've been carrying that place inside you all along. So don't be afraid of your quiet. Don't confuse peace with loneliness. And don't let anyone make you feel broken simply because you don't need as much company as you once did. If your solitude is peaceful, protect it. If your relationships are meaningful, treasure them. And if loneliness is hurting you, reach out. Because growing older isn't about having more people around you, it's about understanding who truly matters. I'm 91. I've learned that lesson slowly, and if I could give my 60-year-old self one piece of advice, I'd say this: don't be afraid of the quiet years. They may become the most meaningful years of your life. Now I'm going to put the kettle on again. It's already complaining, and at 91, I've learned something else. When the kettle starts screaming, you listen. Take care of yourself, protect your peace. Love the people who truly love you, and when you need a little quiet, don't apologize for it. Sometimes being alone isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the moment you finally begin living it.